Total Drama relationship dynamics are very diverse across all the seasons. If we're talking pairings of different characters, we can range from friends, best friends, acquaintances, lovers, or even the occasional situationship. Obviously, these tend to focus on the contestant side because these are the characters competing for the grand prize and all. But one of the most interesting character pairings for me that feels like it goes under the radar for a lot of people is Chris and Chef, or Chris X Chef, depending on the person you ask. When you get right down to it, these two men are the backbone of Total Drama. Time and time again, with the exception of the Dronculus race, these guys have came back to give the people in the world more content for the viewers at home, in turn creating diehard fans who are willing to follow the old contestants on other social media platforms outside the main show. Not even including Sierra, there were lots of other people around the world calling in during the aftermath specials to chat with the contestants. And while the contestants themselves deserve tons of credits, Chris and Chef need their flowers too. But with these two, it's always been a bit of a tough call to determine the true nature of their relationship. Are they actually good friends or even secret lovers? Or just extremely dedicated co-workers that have great on-screen chemistry and nothing more, thus continuing to work together on Total Drama for the sole reason of maintaining the formula that's worked so well so many times before. So I wanted to take this video to go through the interactions between these guys over the seasons they appeared in to see where their relationship currently stands.
Once the hatch is open, it'll drain the water out of both the rooms, and I'll still have a paycheck.
When it comes to the first Total Drama Island season, both Chris and Chef didn't feel like they got a whole lot of characterization until around halfway through the season, let alone tons of interactions with each other yet, as for a while they were just playing the roles the show assigned them. Chris hosting the challenges, while Chef was just the chef outside of acting like the referee for the dodgeball tournament. Up until the basic straining episode, my younger self had always assumed Chef was actually just a camp chef the producers allowed on to stay on the island for filming purposes, which in hindsight was only half true, I guess, as yes, he is indeed a chef. He's also got a heavy military background with an advanced degree in manhunting, according to Chris. This would start a trend of Chef having more involvement in challenges as opposed to just being the chef making the contestants eat slop every morning and evening. It's clear Chris has trust in Chef to take the reins every now and then, which says a lot considering how much of an egomaniac he can be. If you watched all the Total Drama seasons, even pre-reboot, Chris' descent into madness is clear as day. The guy became so obsessed with Total Drama's ratings being high that he kept trying to up the danger levels of each new season without any care for the safety of the contestants, or some of his employees. This was something he and Chef seemed to get enjoyment out of together, as even though I said Chef's screen time pre-basic straining was fairly minimal, there was enough to show us he couldn't stand having to serve food to a bunch of hormonal teenagers every day. So having a challenge where he gets to knock them down a peg was something I'm sure he was looking forward to since the beginning of the season. He likes seeing these kids deal with tough situations. With Chris, he's more of the hands-off guy who constructs the ideas for the challenges and lets the setup for those take their course while enjoying it all from the sidelines. Chef is a lot more hands-on, getting involved while the challenges are going on to actively hinder or hurt the competitors. But to give Chef some grace, the end of the basic straining challenge showed he is capable of showing respect to those who can keep up with his intense energy, as he straight up congratulated Gwen on her win, saying he'd go to war with her any day, even shedding some tears while she walked back to camp. The same cannot be said for Chris. He's too selfish for that, and sometimes his sadism even spreads to Chef. There have been some instances where Chris forced Chef to test out challenges before they went live for safety reasons, like jumping into the shark-infested waters for the first ever challenge, Chris even egging him on about being too scared to jump in. Behavior like this has without a doubt caused some strain in their relationship on Chef's side, and understandably so. As a guy who eventually became like a co-host to Total Drama, giving him similar treatment to contestants is going to make Chef not only feel underappreciated, but expendable to Chris. While I can't say I personally approve of the way these two treat the people on this show, Chef even going as far as throwing hands with Izzy or breaking Owen's jaw, I can understand why he feels like he deserves more credit than he's given, considering the amount of work he puts in, at least compared to Chris. A lot of Chris's work is, stand there and look pretty, while Chef is doing more lifting both literally and figuratively. This is essentially the core reason why the two of them seem to have such a flip-floppy relationship on Total Drama. Things felt like they were on pretty solid terms at the end of Island, where even during the Final Four challenge that left the remaining characters lost at sea, Chef and Chris were really enjoying spending time together, as Chef commending Chris for showing a rare moment of worry for the other competitor's safety, or in the final three how they made a side bet together on who would puke first while doing the dare challenges. And that's real bro shit right there.
That's real bro shit there!
Total Drama Action arguably had some of the best and maybe the most interactions between Chef and Chris of any season, where it leaned a lot more into the negative interactions. Like in the very second episode where Chef calls out Chris for not paying him at all for the work he did on the previous season, which is absolutely insane if that's the implication as opposed to payment for the monster movie action episode. Chef for sure had it easier than other contestants did, but to still not give the guy any type of compensation while they're in the middle of filming the second season is mind-boggling. Chris's teasing of Chef didn't really stop either, like how he made fun of his damsel in distress dress in the Crazy Town episode. Maybe Chris isn't intending to be mean and he's just trying to lightly joke with a guy he considers a friend, but Chef clearly doesn't play around like that.
I don't trust like that.
The reason I say that is because the Chef Shank redemption episode showed Chris attempting to have a real conversation with Chef and Chef not reciprocating at all, leading to one of the more awkward scenes in all of Total Drama. This scene proves Chris does actually care about Chef to a degree, but has trouble showing it consistently / keeps going over the top with on-camera antics for the sake of ratings. While Chef has likely gotten to a point here where all the BS Chris has put him through has made him not really want to be super friendly with him outside of work hours. That guy basically went non-verbal throughout the tail end of this interaction, and it was tough to watch. Chef being fed up with Chris by this point is further backed up by the fact that after the events of Chef Shank, Chef went behind Chris's back to form an illegal alliance with DJ. Chef and DJ started to bond a bit over their love for cooking, so Chef decided he'd help DJ give an advantage in challenges if DJ promises to split the money if he wins. An alliance Chris knew about but pretended to act angry when DJ confessed during his elimination episode. The tension would only continue to build throughout the remainder of the season, like in Master of Disasters when the contestants were actually on the verge of drowning, which left Chris in a panic because no contestants means no paycheck. Chef couldn't believe how entitled and insane Chris was acting here, as Chris still had not paid him for the work on Island at this point despite action already being close to the halfway point of being done. Granted, Chef's lack of care for these kids dying is concerning as well, but for someone who's supposed to be his friend taking advantage of him like this and playing with his money, it's extremely fucked up. So it's no wonder Chef has been defying Chris so much throughout action, even going as far as to physically assault him in $1 Million Babies, knocking out some of his teeth in the process. It wasn't until the mutiny on the soundstage episode where the two of them would be able to reconcile a bit. What started out as a fight on who had the easier job ended with Chris gaining a newfound respect for Chef and even agreeing to some new contract terms, aka a better paycheck, commemorating their deal by flinging a safe at Beth and Duncan. So while things had gotten a lot better between the two, Chef still showed some annoyance with Chris even in the very next episode, like getting worked up with fans asking Chris for autographs or having a bad sense of direction when they ended up at Camp Wawanakwa when trying to get to the Aftermath lot. But the reconciling seemed to outweigh the slight annoyances because Chef would return as a co-host in Total Drama World Tour. Only now, instead of working in a kitchen, most of his time was spent flying the giant cargo plane to new countries for the challenges. Arguments between the two would still take place on occasion, but it was a lot less intense than actions. Like in the Jamaica episode, Chef calling out Chris for spending too much money on the show's budget on himself, followed by throwing a radio at Chris's head. Or forming another illegal alliance with a Blaney this time instead of DJ. In Chef's defense though, this alliance didn't really seem like his idea like it was with DJ's, more so Blaney going out of her way to manipulate Chef into this alliance so she could have a smooth ride throughout the rest of her stay, as she never even wanted to compete in the first place, but was tricked into joining at the end of the previous Aftermath episode by Jeff. This time, Chris punishes Chef for going behind his back by making him wear a parka during their visit to Africa, which obviously sucked for Chef because it was, 90 plus degrees Fahrenheit over there. I guess this was more so done on the principle of Chef betraying Chris's trust a second time, as the alliance with Blaney didn't really do anything for her in the long run because she got eliminated in the same episode the alliance was revealed in, with Chef later retaliating by leaving Chris behind for a bit in Africa while he enjoys the plane's hot tub. The odd Drumheller episode is probably the closest instance we've seen of these two guys getting intimate, I guess, with Chris's laptop wallpaper being a picture of Chef giving him a massage. And yes, I know Terry McGurran has said the idea of these two being together has never officially been discussed during the making of any seasons. That's all good. The last moment we really get from them this season was sharing a laugh at the idea of Cody, Heather, Sierra, and Alejandro getting struck by lightning on their way to Hawaii. So yeah, a lot less screen time together in World Tour compared to action, but they seem to be on much better terms due to the deal they struck in action. As outside of Chef's one complaint about Chris using the overall show budget irresponsibly, Chef wasn't really getting mad at Chris all too often. It felt like the positives outweighed the negatives, even if it was only a little bit. From Revenge of the Island onwards, the interactions between Chef and Chris weren't nearly as common as they once were. A lot more focus was put into the contestants themselves / the over-the-top challenges, with Chris getting more unhinged by the day, so Chef wasn't really around as much. The only instances where it felt like the two of them had significant interactions were the Grand Chef Auto and Puke Be Wary episodes. Chris was once again screwing Chef over by allowing the contestants to drive his cars even though Chris didn't ask Chef for permission beforehand, which resulted in the challenge taking a different direction towards the end, with Chef impersonating Chris and telling the contestants to spray paint the mountain modeled after Chris as revenge.
Nobody touches my stuff. Nobody.
It seems like this was enough for Chef to move on, because in the Puke Be Wary episode when Chris was trapped in the washroom, Chef showed genuine concern for Chris's safety by ordering several interns to save him, which opened the door for Chef to host another challenge for the first time in a while. A challenge that was initially rejected, but last minute greenlit by Chris because it was Scott's fault he got stuck in the washroom, so he wanted to make them suffer. By the time Chris got out, his yearn for the spotlight shafted Chef once again by being the one to catapult Scott off the island. There's nothing that gets Chef angrier than Chris taking credit for his hard work. What Chef did to Chris in Revenge of the Island's finale is probably the worst thing he could have done, at least in Chris's eyes, as Chef rigged a detonator to blow up the dock of shame instead of the boat that the contestants were on that Chris initially wanted to blow up, allowing the authorities to arrest Chris for all the safety laws he broke this season, mainly the ones involving toxic waste. While Chris realistically deserved to go to prison for how insane he'd become, it was technically Chef's prank that was the straw that broke the camel's back. He was stuck in the water with nowhere left to run from the fuzz. It seemed like Chef didn't even really regret this decision much either, as when the All-Stars season began, Chris revealed Chef never visited him in prison once.
Well, look who finally came to visit me after a whole year.
Only coming now because his sentence was over and Chef was delivering Chris a new contract to host the All-Star season. So now we were at a point where more of the negative feelings were stemming from Chris rather than Chef, at least until the Zeke and You Shall Find episode, where Chris was kidnapped by Ezekiel. Chef was so worried about Chris's safety in this episode that he last minute changed the day's challenge to save Chris, where Gwen had to be the one to do it because Chef got shot by his own meatball gun. Pakatu Island almost felt like Chef didn't even need to be there that season, if I'm being real. Chef's a good character, but he was so insanely underutilized this season that it felt like he could have been replaced with literally anybody and it would have barely made a difference to the overall quality. Which already wasn't great to begin with, but still. Outside the literal opening sequence where Chris put Chef in danger by destroying the plane they were on, Chef's appearances from then on were very far and few in between, where even when he was on screen, he wasn't even really talking. Either he was getting hurt or hurting someone else. It got to a point where it felt like the show realized they'd run its course with, making interactions with these characters feel fresh, so they simply sidelined Chef instead of trying to have conversations with these guys take up too much screen time. At least that's my theory. I could be way off. Chef would return as Chris's host in the 2023-2024 reboot seasons, but he almost felt like a completely different character. As in between Pakatu and this reboot, Chef was still partaking in total drama content in the form of Dramarama, an AU total drama spinoff where Chef ran a daycare for younger versions of some of the total drama contestants like Owen, Gwen, Duncan, and Harold. As a child caretaker, he was now a lot more responsible in caring for the safety of the kids he looked after, with this trait carrying over into the reboot seasons, as not only was reboot Chef wearing the same exact outfit as Dramarama Chef, he now felt like the voice of reason to Chris's insanity instead of playing into it or messing with Chris himself. The dynamic between Chris and Chef had completely changed at this point from what most people were used to in previous seasons, maybe for better or worse depending on the person you ask. While I don't necessarily hate the way Chef acts now, I definitely prefer his more hard-ass and somewhat trickster personality from the previous seasons over what Chris now dubbed him as Mr. Safety. Chris messing with Chef is nothing new, but now it's Chef mostly sitting back and taking it rather than retaliating like he used to. The guy who once didn't care if several teens would drown to death because he wasn't getting a paycheck is now borderline begging Chris to get injured contestants flown to a hospital. While Chef's personality may be much more likable to those involved in competing in the seasons, for the viewers it may be considered a downgrade to what his character used to be and how he and Chris bounced off each other. They were easily at their peaks in action and World Tour, but it got to a point where Chef continued to get sidelined, and by the time he returned, felt like a completely different character, because he kinda was. And I get it, Total Dramarama, while not my cup of tea, was an objectively popular show that got a lot of people watching. I imagine mostly a lot of young kids, so by the time Dramarama was over, the kids who grew up watching it were now old enough to segue into the more, mature Total Drama content, i.e. the reboot. So Chef returning with his Dramarama design and personality may have been done to add a sense of familiarity to those who had been following Dramarama for so long and had gotten used to that version of Chef. Again, another theory, as I don't believe there's been any kind of confirmation on why this decision was done with Chef's character. So what's the deal with these guys? As far as I can tell, they're pretty close friends, maybe not best friends, but maybe on the verge. While they may have been at odds with each other over some pretty serious issues, that can happen sometimes. Friends fight and disagree with one another, but can still move past it, and these guys did time and time again. Chris was worse to Chef than vice versa, but Chef kept coming back each season to back Chris up. At the very least, there's a mutual respect between the two. It's a shame we won't see more of these guys for the foreseeable future, even if I prefer the old dynamic, as upcoming Total Drama content seems extremely unlikely right now. We can blame bad network decisions and marketing on that though, because holy Christ did they absolutely botch the release schedule for that second season. Let me know what you think of Chris and Chef's bromance in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, all that good jazz. But for now, I will see you guys next time. Peace out, take care, bye-bye.